Nier Automata T-shirt, Nier Automata T-shirt, Nier Automata T-shirt, Square Next.
If you've not heard the name Yoko Taro before now, then, well, first of all, your deprived soul has my deepest sympathies. Hopefully, this image should spark some memories for you if you watched E3 a few years ago. But he is the creative mind behind such cool classics as the Drakengard trilogy, Demon Score, and most relevant to this, the 2010 RPG Nier. He's not exactly a household name or anything, but those who know him kind of adore him. Yoko Taro! Holy That's what it. And really, it's not hard to see why. If you look behind the tremendously animated personality, you'll find the mind of a man who dedicates his art to exploring some really dark and unsettling psychological and philosophical themes. This demeanor then also translates to his works of fiction, very dark and unsettling, complex thematic stories and tales, wrapped in the guise of something very humorous and quirky in presentation. And Nier Automata is the culmination of that bizarre mind. This game is spectacular. The kind of spectacular that only a mind as simultaneously twisted and thoughtful as Yoko Taro's can come up with, though. Set in the far distant future, the human race has been forced to flee planet Earth following an invasion by an alien race via an army of killer machines. The remainder of humanity now resides on the moon, and in order to fight off the alien menace and their machine creations, have themselves created an army of androids known as Yorha. The player will take control of a pair of androids in this unit, 2B and 9S, and will undertake various missions to defeat the enemy machines that remain, and discover the fate of their alien creators. And my synopsis ends there, for were I to say literally anything else, I would be marching very close to spoiler territory, which I guarantee you is something you do not want me to do. The way the story is presented here is done so in a way that can't actually be replicated in any way other than a video game, with the way it shows you differing perspectives and slowly unfolds the overarching plot. Now, there are arguably a few times where that is done to the overall detriment of the story, as you will be facing quite a bit of repetition in the later parts of the narrative. But as I try to consider any other way they could have presented this story, I honestly can't think of how they could have done so without compromising the overall intent of telling the story through the gameplay. The themes that Nier Automata tackles are by no means groundbreaking on the surface, but it's the way it goes about them that makes them so profoundly compelling. We've all seen the question of, can a machine become a human, or what makes humans innately, presented in various forms throughout the years. Nier, however, takes a very different approach to this. Instead of showing a robot slowly develop human emotions and have people react out of fear, as we've seen an exhaustingly numerous amount of times, right from the start, the androids of Yorha are already shown to be human-like. They have their own emotions and personalities that make them more human. Instead of asking if such a thing is even possible, the story instead opts for an approach of exploring the implications of a world like this, in which synthetic beings are able to have humanity, and thus fulfills the golden rule of storytelling: show, don't tell. Rather than putting up with philosophical diatribes, we as the audience actually get to see firsthand what the results of such a setting would be, how the characters react to different situations, even how an individual's way of experiencing life and death fundamentally alters their values and what they hold dear. And it does all of this without falling into the much dreaded trap of being preachy. The message isn't, here's what you should think about this topic. Instead, it's more of, here's the way things are, like it or not, now how do you deal with it? I find any given setting or tale far easier to get into when it presents its ideas to you as if you were a thinking and intelligent individual who may not agree with everything, but can at least fairly evaluate them, rather than treating you like an immature, uncultured child who needs to be told what to think and how to behave, especially for a story dealing with subject matter as mature as this. It feels a bit redundant to point out the irony that this cast of inhuman androids and machines feels more human and sympathetic than the overwhelming majority of characters from your typical big-budget video game. In fact, it's a bit meta when you think about it, that you're getting so emotionally attached to these fictional characters in a video game, until you realize that the entire story is about the humanity and emotions of typically inhuman robotic beings. Makes you think, doesn't it? Of course, what would a character be without a talented performance to go with it? I'll tell you exactly what it'd be. It'd be Star Ocean The Last Hope. But we're here to talk about Nier today, which, on the other hand, has an excellent voice cast. I do seem to be on a bit of a hot streak as far as good JRPG dubs go. Not that I'm complaining, mind you, it's just a bit unusual. But every member of the cast does a stellar job at injecting life into these characters, which, considering how exceedingly poor the reception of Drakengard 3's dub was, is enough to put a massive grin on this man's face. A2 and 6-0 are no surprise, as they are voiced by proven actors, as well as the main antagonists, Adam and Eve. Kyle McCarley's performance as 9S, however, left me greatly impressed in how both wide and convincing his emotional range was, especially coming from a relatively new voice actor. In the interest of fairness, I will say that Kira Buckland's performance as 2B wasn't as consistent as the rest. Most of the time, especially at the moments that it really mattered, her delivery was spot on, but there were also a number of moments that fell incredibly flat. I get that the character is supposed to be a more serious and level-headed, but these lines sounded more just bored than calculating or logical. But again, overall, she and everyone else left me pleased with the outcome. Almost as pleased as with the game's beautiful musical accompaniment. The composers' names, which on the screen now, have quite the track record to them, despite me not having heard of either of them before this. That said, if this is their level of quality, then I need to pay more attention to these two. I find it very difficult to describe why exactly the score works without just telling you to go and listen to it for yourself, other than repeating what I have already said when I look at any soundtrack. And although the overall soundtrack does fall a bit more on the atmospheric and tonal side of the spectrum rather than the purely memorable songs, there are several songs that do stand out on their own and are worth listening to in their own right. The entire game has a very Metal Gear Solid vibe to it, what with its similar menu design, philosophical nature of the plots, entertaining codec calls with offshore squad members, and being developed by a complete madman. Though I'd say Nier in particular shares a lot more similarities with Metal Gear Rising, probably on account of being developed at the hands of Platinum Games. And if you're familiar with Platinum Games and their work, then you've got a pretty good idea of what to expect from this. It's an interesting blend of fast-paced hack-and-slash combat and RPG leveling and equipment. The twist here, however, and the reason that Nier stands out, is how it presents its mission design. Instead of relying on one gameplay style through the whole game, Nier instead is constantly switching back and forth between several game styles to keep things from feeling too repetitive. One minute it's a bullet hell, the next it's a side-scrolling beat-em-up, and the next it's a top-down twin-stick shooter. Even though this constant changing may seem on the surface really annoying, the reason it works so incredibly well is how the fundamental controls and mechanics never change once throughout. By simply coming up with clever utilizations of different camera perspectives, the developers have managed to string together several different gameplay styles seamlessly without ever having them feel jarring or out of place, and needing the player to completely readjust. Couple that with boss fights, each of which are a spectacle in their own right, and the end result is a true masterwork of design and storytelling. But not a perfect one, mind you. There are a few problems, which I shall address now! The game's visual design leaves a lot to be desired. Character designs are rather nice, but the color palette and look of everything else is rather muted and not very distinct. For the most part, this is just a minor visual complaint, but it can be a real problem at times when the rendering of the environments all look so similar that it becomes difficult to tell where exactly you're moving or what's happening on screen, particularly during the side-scrolling sequences. There are also too many invisible walls everywhere that obstruct you from a sense of freedom, and a few poorly thought-out design elements can really break your immersion out of frustration during some of the more dramatic moments, if you're not careful. And that's about it. Not to say those are just nitpicks, but in the grand scheme of things, they're really inconsequential. You see, Nier Automata is a type of game that shows exactly why video games are such a unique and valuable form of storytelling. It integrates its complex storyline and themes and mechanics together in a way where one could simply not exist without the other. When combined with the quality of the voice work, the outstanding musical score, the final result is a superb artistic work from one man's mind that I am unbelievably eager to see more of. But what ultimately seals the deal for me is the game's ending. I have long held the belief that a story's ending is the most important part of it. just as a botched punchline can ruin an entire joke, an ending that doesn't fulfill, or even worse, goes against what the entire point of the story had been set up to be, can destroy any kind of investment you had. And without obviously giving anything away, I will say there is a fair amount of time and effort needing to be invested in order to unlock the game's true ending. But the way the story concludes and conveys its message through a final gameplay challenge, a moral decision that conveys so much, though seeming so inconsequential, all the way up to the last line, is about as beautiful and perfect as an ending to this kind of journey could possibly hope for. It feels as if Yoko Taro's previous works have all been experiments with varying levels of quality, ultimately leading up to this one. And if that is indeed the case, then, well, my congratulations to you, sir, because all of your hard work has most certainly paid off. Thus, my final rating for Nier Automata is a spectacular 9 out of 10, and awarded with my prestigious best of the best recommendation. For the longest time I wrestled with whether or not to give this a buy it at full price recommendation, but with an ending as spectacular as this one, anything less than a Bob Award for me would feel demonstrably unfitting for this gem. So, if you enjoyed Nier Automata and you're looking for similar games, or vice versa, then I'll send you first towards the previously mentioned Metal Gear Rising: Revengeance. While not a flawless game, I've not met many who have played it that did not at least have a blast while doing so. Next up is a bit more of a cautious recommendation, but a sure one regardless, if you're into Yoko Taro's special brand of surrealism, and that's the Drakengard trilogy. Mind you, this series has its fair share of detractors as well as fans, but to not at all at least give it a recommendation to check out would be a great disservice, in my mind. And finally, my other favorite game of the year so far, at least at the time of recording this, I give you Nioh. For something more akin to Dark Souls, but featuring a faster-paced combat style, if you're looking for something to really test your mettle against. And hopefully at least one of those will do you well. All that said, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for watching. Please, if you enjoyed this video, then you know the drill by now. You know how to click a subscribe and like button, so get on that, please.
It was at this moment that the battery on Caius's camera, which had fought valiantly for 40 minutes, died.
And that's the end, folks.